much. With that, we bring in former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, now a Fox News contributor and distinguished fellow at the Hudson Institute. Secretary, good to have you with us, as always. Let's start with where Trey left off, and with Mohammed bin Salman. And, you know, this was just, it's sort of a less important matter, but I wonder what it says to you, this whole thing about the handshake. You know, we said, we saw Karine Jean-Pierre, the press secretary, said this about the fact that he wouldn't be shaking hands with any leaders, and MBS is probably top of the list. Here's what she said.
We are saying that we're going to try to minimize contact as much as possible, but also there are precautions that we are taking because this is up to his doctor.
So then the president proceeded to fist bump and shake hands with a whole bunch of people this morning. What is this theater? What does all this mean with regard to his undoubtful meeting with Mohammed bin Salman and the discussion about, gee, we could really use a little more oil supply on the market?
Yeah, Martha, some of it's a little bit silly, right? The whole handshake deal. It's kind of silly. It's a common courtesy that one shakes hands when they meet a foreign counterpart. It seems like that would be the right and decent thing to do. President Biden made a mistake. He said there were things he wouldn't do that he might have to do, and he's now has to do them. Right? The United States ought to and has to have a relationship with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and President Biden should have known that, but he was playing to the progressive left, right? Jumping on the bandwagon of, we have human values that the Trump administration doesn't have. He was just wrong about that. We care deeply about human rights. We condemned the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. I personally signed sanctions against, I think it was a dozen folks. But this relationship to isolate Iran and to build out with our friends, the Israelis, the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Omanis, the Kuwaitis in that region is good for the American people, and we ought to do it. I'm glad he's going there. I hope he resets this thing in a way that delivers for the American people. It's
interesting because he's saying that the region is much more stable than it was 18 months ago. And I think about the Abraham Accords and the really interesting communications that we were seeing between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which obviously, as you say, isolates Iran even more. And now what you see is Saudi Arabia sort of saying, well, you know what, U.S., we're going to maybe do this deal with China. There are interests with Russia as well on the parts of some of these players. What do you make of it?
Yeah, he's just fibbing. I'm trying to be diplomatic. I used to be a diplomat, Martha.
Not anymore.
It's not more stable. It's not more stable. It's not more prosperous. They flipped the switch and they made life difficult for the Israeli people by trying to get back into the JCPOA, which would give Iranians money, the kind of money that they'll use to build out the very drones that now will be shipped to Russia and used to kill Ukrainian kids. Right? These were policies that didn't make any sense, and yet it's the ones that the Biden administration went down. Well, don't forget, their efforts in the region began with Afghanistan, that withdrawal that killed 13 Americans and left a bunch of Americans behind. The Biden administration refuses to even utter the word Afghanistan. But I promise you, every Saudi, every Emirati, every Israeli remembers what happened in August of last year, now almost 12 months ago. It made us weaker. It made him weaker. Made America less capable of delivering that very peace and stability that we had for 4 years in the region.
Yeah, this issue of these UAVs, I want to play this soundbite from Jake Sullivan, who says, as you pointed out, that Iran is supplying Russia with UAVs that could be used to attack civilians in Ukraine. Here is Jake Sullivan.
The Iranian government is preparing to provide Russia with up to several hundred UAVs, including weapons-capable UAVs. It's unclear whether Iran has delivered any of these UAVs to Russia already. But this is just one example of how Russia is looking to countries like Iran for capabilities.
I mean, do we have any leverage in this situation?
Yeah, that clip you play, Martha, is pretty smart. I think you got it exactly right. This is what happens. When you say that the Saudis are pariahs and the Iranians are your negotiating partners, this is what you get. You get the Iranians hugging the Chinese, hugging the Russians, and you get the Saudis saying, I'm not going to take a phone call from you. Right. He's quite right to be worried about these Iranian drones. They now are going to grow the Iranian economy at 4, 5, 6%. We shrank it by 10, 15, 20%. And with that money, with those resources, they'll resume their role as the world's largest state sponsor of terror. And to ship these drones, these unarmed vehicles, or these unmanned vehicles that are likely to be armed to Russia, presents real risk to NATO, real risk to the Ukraine. And it didn't have to be the case, Martha. These were choices the Biden administration made that are failing us.
And you know that eventually they were going to find these UAVs in Ukraine and figure out where they came from. So they're getting ahead of it by explaining that they're aware of this thing happening. I'm almost out of time, but let me play this soundbite. I just want to get a quick thought from you on the other side, because this is a brand new one from President Biden in Israel. Watch.
In the past said you'll do anything, and you say it again, that you'll ensure Iran would not acquire nuclear weapons. Does that also mean, sir, that you would use force against Iran? Is that what that means, if needed?
That was the last resort, yes.
Mm-hmm. Quick thought on that, sir.
Well, I'm glad he made a statement that didn't restrict what we would do. He spent a lot of time his first 20 months talking about things we wouldn't do. I'm happy that in response to that, he didn't say there was something we wouldn't do. We need to make sure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon. We were prepared to do that along with our Israeli and Arab partners. That's why it's important to build out the stability and peace in the region that we worked so hard on as part of the Abraham Accords.
All right. Secretary Pompeo, it was good to have you here, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martha. Have a great day.
You too.